right. This is Michael Wasylik, Florida foreclosure defense lawyer, Ricardo and Wasylik, where we crush the dreams of banksters across the state trying to take homes from helpless Florida families. And I have with me on the phone today Laurie Zoock. Welcome, Laurie.
Thanks, Michael.
Laurie, why don't you tell me a little bit about what our topic today is going to be talking about: credit reporting, inaccurate credit reporting, how to fix that when it happens, and what other remedies might exist in the world of the credit scores, credit reporting, everything you wanted to know about your credit score. Tell me a little bit, Laurie, if you could, how you first got into this area. What first made you start looking up, researching, learning about the way credit reporting works?
Well, actually, Mike, it was all an accident. I was originally licensed as a realtor here down, I guess, about 2005, and I worked on a RE/MAX team, but I ended up taking over for a team member who was trying to work with clients who had bad credit for the team leader, helping people get into homes. And when I jumped into that position, I had to learn a lot in a short amount of time, and I was a bit frustrated. But over a period of time and a lot of research, I started figuring out that the system for credit reporting doesn't work the way that you think it does. It doesn't work. I've read a lot of books, I've seen all the websites, and it really doesn't work the way that people think it does. It actually fails to work in that respect. So I eventually formed my own business, which is now called Credit Education Consultants. And my goal is to help people get on track by teaching them how it works and navigating with them through the system. So I work in tandem with the client.
Now, how many of the people you work with today are people who are in the real estate market, either trying to buy a home or are looking for home loans or refi or other things like that?
I'm going to say the majority of them are. Once in a while I get a client that's not, but most of my clients come from, from mortgage people or from realtors because they are trying to get into a home, and because they haven't monitored their credit, and they get to the mortgage person and their credit's pulled, usually at that point it's a mess, and that's when the referring party will send them to me and say, this client needs help.
Okay. Well, there's so much here already that I want to unpack, and so I'm hoping we have time to get to everything that we
Sure.
Can talk about today. You said something about how people haven't monitored their credit. It's direct. It sounds as if people come to you surprised at what they have found by the time they get to you. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say the majority of them do. They because they don't know, and they haven't checked. They haven't done, the annual creditreport.com check where you can get your credit reports free once a year. Most of them are surprised.
Okay. Well, and again, there's a lot there that we want to unpack too, because I know that there's a way to monitor your credit score, and there's a way to get certain credit reports, and I definitely don't want to miss talking about that. Now, but the one thing that really sparked my curiosity about something you said a moment ago is when you said that the system for credit reporting doesn't work the way people think it does, that it works differently, and I think you said that you don't think it really works very well. So let's take those one at a time. First of all, in your experience, how do people think it works, and how is that wrong?
Well, they think that they just send in letters to the credit bureaus, and the big three are TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, and they think they send in dispute letters, and that it's going to come off the reports, like magic. It's going to just come off the reports, and when it doesn't, they become frustrated, or worse, they hire a credit repair agency that basically does the same thing, only most of the time the client doesn't see those letters, so they don't even know it's being written, and they think it just comes off the reports, and it doesn't. That's the first problem.
Well, and so now where do people get this expectation that it's just going to magically come off the reports? Do they find stuff on the internet that may not be correct, or where do they get this idea?
Yeah, they'll either find things on the internet, or they may read a book, or they're solicited by credit repair companies, or they look up credit repair companies, And those companies will advertise, we can, we will, we guarantee that we will delete, judgments and liens and, all these items, debt collections off of your report. And in essence, they're taking the client's money. The client really does not understand what's happening. They're putting their trust in that company, but the majority of these companies aren't going to do any better with the credit reporting agencies than the client could do themselves.
Now, something you just said really kind of parked my interest there. You said that a lot of these credit repair agencies will guarantee that they can get things like judgments removed from credit. I thought that was illegal.
Well, it is, and if they fall under the Credit Repair Organizations Act, it not only is it illegal to do that, to say that, but most of these companies also charge an upfront fee to do that. Now, there are some that don't, that follow the guidelines, but those are few and far between.
So it's illegal to charge an upfront fee, and it's also illegal to guarantee results. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And I understood as well that it's illegal for a company to represent that it can get accurate information deleted from credit reports. Is that also true?
That's true unless there is proper legal standing in which it should come off, or if the client has some type of documented evidence. Because the credit repair, first off, let me define the credit repair companies people think are government organizations. And they're not. They're 3 independent corporations. They each report whatever their paying subscriber tells them to report, unless they have some type of documentation to counter that. And that doesn't always work either. But you have a better shot if you do have some type of documentation regarding a specific issue. So the credit reporting agencies like to report what the creditors and collection agencies tell them to, because they are the customers to the credit bureaus, not the consumer.
Well, in a minute, I want to talk to you about what does work, and you're telling me a little bit about what doesn't work. But you also just raised a really interesting point in that the big 3 credit reporting agencies, they work for the lenders, not for the consumers.
That's correct.
And so it's kind of in their interest to be maybe overcautious in terms of reporting possibly negative data. And by overcautious, I mean before a lender makes a loan, they'd rather err on the side of not making somebody a loan that is possibly going to have a hiccup in their credit history, right?
Right, and actually you raise an interesting point there, because what a lot of people don't know is that when they go to a lender and they have their credit pulled, which is typically by their name and their social security number and their address, and the reports are pulled, these credit bureaus, what they do is they use, they have a huge database, and they pull similar information, which may not necessarily be the client's information. And in the credit business, we call this a merged file. So it's possible, if you don't look at your reports and you don't, check them at least annually to see what's on the reports, because oftentimes I will look at a report and I will see different names. I'll see a junior and a senior, which is often, usually a merged file. I may see another social security number, sometimes more than one. So the credit bureaus would rather have more information, even if it's inaccurate, than the correct, smaller file of accurate information.
So they actually have an incentive to over-report negative information about a person rather than make sure the information is accurate. Now,
right, that's correct. That's correct. Yep.
You talked about a merged file, and although I think I know what that means, I want to make sure that I'm clear on it. A merged file is where a reporting agency takes information from what may be 2 completely different people. Maybe it's Joe Smith and Joe Smith, or maybe it's Joe Smith and John Smith, or maybe it's Joe Smith and Jane Smith, and report it together as if it were the same person, even if it's not.
Right, that's correct. And I'll just give you a short example. One of my first cases many years ago was a client who had a common name. Next door to him lived a neighbor in an apartment complex with the same last name, but they were not related. And their information on their, not only did they get each other's mail, but on their credit reports, they had each other's information. That's a scary one. I had another one, years ago.
That'd be really scary if you had a deadbeat for a neighbor with the same last name.
Right. Well, here's a scary story for you. Years ago, I had a client with a common name, and on her report, I noticed there was a name, the same name but a different middle initial. And through the course of some research, I discovered that the other person whose information appeared on her report actually was in prison. And my client had never purchased a home and was looking to purchase her first home. And yet the second person had apparently purchased 11 properties and then defaulted on them. And all those properties appeared on my client's report.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
It was kind of scary for her.
Well, I know that at one point I had some credit information intermingled with my father's, which actually turned out to be fine for both of us because both of us are
rated well.
Done okay with our credit reports, but to have someone on your credit report who's defaulted on 11 home loans and then went to prison.
Yes.
That could be devastating. Now
it was.
So, how common is it for you to see mistakes, or are there any statistics, any trustworthy third-party analysis of how often credit reports contain incorrect, negative information?
Well, that depends upon whose report you read, and I've read a number of reports, and they range anywhere from 20 to 90%. That's a huge difference. My best guesstimate, based upon what I've seen personally, is probably around 70% of people have inaccurate information on their reports. That's a very high number.
That's huge. So anyone listening to this, 70% chance that there's negative information on their credit report that's not correct.
Correct.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what somebody in that situation can do. Well, first of all, let's talk about how do you find out when that happens. Most people find out, I think you said most people find out when they try to get a loan and they get back a negative report from the lender saying we're not going to loan you information, or we're not going to loan you money because the information in your credit report, which is something, by the way, they're required to give. If a lender turns you down, they have to tell you what information in your credit report, generally speaking, was the cause of that, right?
Right, but I also want to point out one other way you might know, because if your file is merged with someone who has defaulted on debts, you may be getting calls from debt collectors on debts that you had nothing to do with, and that's a red flag right there that you need to pull your credit report immediately.
That's a great point. So if you've been turned down for credit, or you've been offered higher interest rate credit or some other negative credit action, they should let you know. But you might be getting phone calls from debt collectors for debts that you had nothing to do with.
That's right.
All right. So let's say I found out, I got a hint of a negative report on my credit score, my credit report. I want to find out what's on there, or maybe I have no hint at all. I just want to do the responsible thing, brush my teeth every day and check my credit report once a year. How do I do that?
Well, the only way to check your credit reports once a year, the National Clearinghouse for the 3 credit bureaus, is done through annualcreditreport.com, and that allows you to pull the TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian files. You can do it online or or via the phone call, and they can mail it to you, and you can check each of those reports. However, you have to purchase your scores separately if you want to see your scores.
Okay, so the scores you have to pay for, but the report itself is free if you go to annualcreditreport.com.
Correct. Now, I will tell you there's a way you can pay for it yourself, which is through MyFICO, MyFICO.com, and that, for a fee, I believe it's about $50, will allow you to pull your credit reports and your credit scores. Now, when you pull your own reports or your own scores, no points are taken off by the FICO system, as opposed to when you go to a lender. Each time you go to a lender, you're going to lose points off of your score.
So just having someone check your credit score is actually a negative hit on your credit.
Right. I believe on average it's a 2 to 5 point hit every time a lender pulls your credit.
Okay. Now, I've seen on TV, I'm sure you have too, the guys in the band singing about their credit report and all that. Now, that's they say it's a free credit report, but that's not really free, is it?
No, most monitoring services are actually owned by one of the credit bureaus. FreeCreditReport.com was actually owned by Experian, and my understanding was they were actually sued, I think, for a couple of $1 million at least, because even though they still have the name FreeCreditReport.com, it's not free. You're paying for a monitoring service. They may give you a free trial, sometimes for a certain amount of time. But the other important thing to know about credit monitoring services, Mike, is that the scores are not FICO scores. They're FICO scores, as we call them in the industry. They're not real FICO.
Nice.
Right, but they're good. They're good if you understand that you're going to pay for them. They're good to monitor your reports, and also if something changes, you'll get an alert, which is good.
Okay, so despite the fact that they're advertising free credit reports, that particular site isn't really free. But what you're suggesting is it's probably worth paying for a monitoring service if you have some concerns about your credit.
Yes.
And you use myfico.com?
Yes, I've used it. I've referred it to my clients if they want to check their own credit before they go back to a mortgage person or try and close on the house and they want to know where they're standing. Then, that's a good way to do it. But now that leads me to one more point for you. FICO scores. There's really no such thing as a FICO score. Everyone thinks there is. FICO scores are a secret algorithm that the company, Fair Isaac Company, developed, and that each of the three credit bureaus has a slightly adapted version. FICO scores can change on a daily basis. Not only that, but mortgage companies use a slightly different version of the standard FICO scores, and insurance companies use another version, and car lenders use another version. So your FICO scores can vary widely depending upon who's pulling it and where you are, for example, in paying off your credit cards, because the system through the bureaus might be updated once a month, and where you fall will depend upon where you are in that system.
So Fair Isaac has a formula that they use for what we call the FICO score, but everybody uses their own different blend of that.
Yes, that's correct.
So your score, your so-called credit score, can be wildly different depending whether you're buying a car, buying a house, pulling a credit card, applying for a job, right?
Oh, yes, it can. And not only that, if you, I've had situations where a client has tried to use two different mortgage people to pull their scores on the same day and gotten different FICO scores from each lender. And I've been told, although I can't confirm this, I've been told that it may also be based upon the software that a specific mortgage company uses to pull it. So it's wild.
So this is chaos, is what you're describing.
Yes, it's exactly chaos.
Total chaos. Okay. Now, and by the way, one thing I just kind of it popped out of my mouth a minute ago is even if you're not looking to borrow money ever, let's say you've already won the lottery, you don't need to borrow money ever, but your credit report can be used by people for other things, right? Like if you're applying for a job, or you're trying to
if you're applying for a job, especially government jobs or high-paying jobs, the companies are going to check your credit worthiness. They want to see, how do you handle your personal affairs? How do you handle your credit? How do you handle your money? So they're going to look to see, where your scores are at.
Okay, so the scores don't really exist in the sense that everybody thinks there. Everybody thinks there's this mythical one score, but it's actually wildly different across the board. But ultimately, it's all based upon the information in the credit report. What kind of information do you typically see in a credit report that has an impact on your score or on your potential scores, plural?
Well, first off, having a good mix of credit is important. So a good mix of credit might be a good mix of credit can be credit cards, revolving credit cards, installment credit cards. It can be a car loan. It can be educational loans. So having a good mix is important to the FICO scoring system. Having a mortgage, those things can add points. Another thing that's important is if you make any late payments, you've just shot yourself in the foot, so to speak, by dropping your score. So you don't want to make any late payments. Length of history, how long you've had your credit cards or your credit. So, for example, I have 2 credit cards that are both 15 years old with perfect payment history, and having a good mix of credit and no late payments, my scores are over 800. So, let me just give you some tips here.
That's great, by the way.
Yeah,
That's a great score.
yeah. If you have credit cards and you close them, it's a FICO score hit. If the credit grantor closes them, it's a FICO score hit. FICO is designed to be a hit to you, to the consumers anyway. Anything that can be a hit to you will be a hit to you. So you have to understand how the system works or fails to work and then manipulate around it ethically. There are ways to do things to bring your score up, and that's what most people don't understand, and that's what I teach.
Well, it sounds in part like the whole credit score algorithm is designed to rate you higher if you're a good little debt consumer and have the right kinds of have a variety of different kinds of debt, and you pay on time and you do things that make lenders happy. Not necessarily what's good for you financially, but what makes the lenders happy.
Right. Exactly. You're exactly right on that.
Okay. Now, so let's say I've gone to one of the places you recommend, the annualcreditreport.com, the myfico.com. I've monitored my credit. I find out that there's something on my file that is wrong. First of all, what's the most likely thing? You talked about merged files. Is that the most likely error you see?
Excuse me, that's probably the most common thing that I see. So if there are things that are not on your report and you know they're not yours, now keep in mind they could be, if you're married, it could be your spouse because credit can report jointly. So it's possible your spouse's credit can be on there. You have to make sure it's not either of yours. Then chances are you're either the victim of a merged file, and a way to figure that out is by looking at the AKAs, the also known as name section, checking to see the Social Security number is yours and there's not more than one Social Security number reporting, and checking the addresses that are listed and the employers. That's the first thing I look at on a report is the personal information to make sure that it's actually that of the client and not that of somebody else. So you want to check that personal information page.
So you check that out. You see something wrong, whether it's a merged file. Maybe they've misreported a debt as late when it wasn't. Something like that. Does that also happen?
That also happens. Yes.
Okay.
Keep in mind, anyone can make a typo too. From a creditor to a collection agency can also make an error. It's getting it corrected that's difficult.
That's right, because the credit reporting agencies, they don't create this information themselves. They rely on the creditors who report the information to them.
Correct. And keep in mind that it's also done electronically through an electronic email system with 2-digit codes. So when you dispute things with the credit bureaus, it's a good idea in the sense from a legal perspective, for the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that you can dispute, but the chances of anything happening unless you have some type of documentation, some type of evidence, chances are nothing's going to happen with the credit bureaus. Most likely you're going to have to take it up with the company.
Let's talk about, first of all, the first step of the process you just talked about, which is under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, what remedies are allowed by that. And then you talked about a multi-step process. At first you talked to the CRA, then you talked to the actual creditor. So first of all, give me just an overview about what the Fair Credit Reporting Act allows you to do to dispute your debt or dispute your credit report.
Yeah. Well, the Fair Credit Reporting Act allows you to send well, first off, you're allowed to do it by phone and you're allowed to do it online. However, knowing as many attorneys as I do, including yourself, that the best way to protect yourself as a consumer is to put it in writing in a letter and send it certified return receipt so that you have something to show that you did it. You have to think like you're your own lawyer, or pro se as you would call it. So you can send out a dispute letter and you have to list the account number, or the amount of the debt, the creditor or the collection agency, whatever it is that you're disputing, and you have to include 2 forms of legal ID. And that's the only way that they will process it. What most people get stuck at is, why didn't they take it off if it was wrong.
Okay. Well, now,
And
when did the ID requirement come into play? Because I don't remember that being ever a part of it.
okay, it has to be, yeah, it has to be one photo ID in the form of a driver's license or passport. And by the way, the driver's license address must match the client's address. Then secondly, they also need to send a copy of their birth certificate or their social security card. Those are the two forms of ID. Now, if the driver's license address doesn't match, what they can also do is send a third form of ID in the form of a utility bill, and that's what they require to process the dispute.
So if you've just moved and haven't updated your driver's license yet, which is a bad idea, by the way, but
right.
Okay, then a utility bill will suffice. So they've got your driver's license and your social security card in the mail. Make sure you send that safely, I guess. I'd hate for that to get misdirected.
Right.
They have a lot of credit problems of a different kind. They get it, and they receive your challenge to, hey, that's a merged file, or that debt is not mine, or I didn't actually fail to pay it, and here's the canceled check to prove I paid this on time, something like that. And then what is their next step? What do they have to do when they get that dispute?
Okay, if the consumer is providing the documentation to show that they're in the right, they need to include a copy, not the original, they should keep the original, include a copy of that along with the dispute, at which point the credit bureau or bureaus they've submitted it to, they can send it electronically with a code to that creditor or collection agency, and hopefully, I say hopefully, they will resolve it because they have some type of documented proof. However, that does not always happen, and that's what you have to be prepared for.
Okay, and that's I can tell that's that's where a lot of what you do comes in. That
right.
Why, if you've got the documentation, why would they not fix it at that stage?
That would be, I'll give you my wild guesses on that one. First off, people don't understand that most of the credit bureaus at this point, when you send in a dispute, they scan it and send it overseas. So you have people, you might have 100 people in sitting in cubicles, and all day they're reading these disputes. And they probably, I believe on average, have about 3 minutes to read your dispute letter. So keep it short and sweet. Because if you write something multiple pages, or you don't, let's say you've forgotten your ID, you might not make it even into the system to begin with. So that's a big issue there. Another wild guess is, hey, the worse your credit scores are, the higher the interest rates are that you pay on everything. So the credit reporting agencies, the credit bureaus, again, will favor the collection agencies and the creditors that pay them to report to them. And that's what a lot of people don't understand.
They have a financial incentive to maintain negative, inaccurate information because it makes their clients more money, and that makes their clients happier.
You hit the nail on the head right there, Mike.
So follow the money. Follow the money. When you want to know where the system is broken, follow the money. All right, so they get the dispute. Well, first, let me ask you one question real quick here. Now, what happens if the credit reporting agency receives your dispute, sends it to the creditor, and the creditor fails to respond? Do they have a timeline? What happens if they miss it?
Yes. If they miss the timeline, which is 30 days from the date they received it, then it should come off your report. Now, let me just point out, even if it does come off your report, at some point, if that creditor finds the information and sends it back, yes, it can reappear. They are supposed to notify you, the consumer, but I've never seen that happen, ever.
So it's like a zombie. You've never seen them actually notify the creditor or notify the borrower, right?
I've never seen them notify the client that they reinserted the negative credit line. No. I mean, this is like zombie bad debt. You've killed it once. It comes back to life. It's you got to cut its head off somehow. Well, right, and anything can come back. I mean, even clients who maybe have negotiated credit lines off their credit reports, and there are ways to do that. I tell them, you must keep the paperwork you have from that company, because years later, it can pop back up again. Mm-hmm. And now you have to go through it again. Whereas if you keep the paperwork, or better yet, scan it into your computer, it's much easier to go back and say, hey, I've already resolved that. What are you doing?
Okay. So when you say a negotiated credit report, that means you've entered in some kind of settlement with the creditor, and as part of that settlement, they agree not to report you negatively, or they agree to report you in a particular way, such as paid in full, and that's what is that what you're talking about?
Right. In other words, you can sometimes negotiate with the creditor, although more typically with a collection agency, to have an item removed from your report, or for a lesser harmful rating than a paid collection.
So if that crops up years down the road, you've still got your documentation of, hey, I negotiated that away. That's something you dispute as well, right?
Right, because now you have evidence. You have some type of proof to go back to the company. Right, exactly.
Got it. Okay, super. So at this stage, let me just, at this stage, if the credit reporting agency fails to delete inaccurate information after a dispute, you have rights under the FCRA to enforce that, don't you?
You do, but let me point out, you do have actually two opportunities. You have the opportunity for a reinvestigation, and you can do that. The third time, if you don't have any documentation or any evidence to show them, and you're just sending in a generic dispute letter, it will come back marked frivolous and irrelevant, meaning we don't care what you say at this point, you have nothing to prove, and we're no longer going to honor your disputes.
Okay, but the first one, let's say you do have documentation on the first one. Hey, you've got my neighbor's information mixed in with mine. We have nothing to do with each other. Here's the proof. They fail to clear it from your report. You can actually sue them, can't you, at that point?
Yeah, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Yeah, no. Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you can. Typically, what I'll tell a client before they get to the lawsuit stage is to do. There's a couple more things they can try to do. And, you know, unfortunately, this is a lengthy time period, so it depends upon the client's situation. If they have enough time and they're not trying to close on a house right away, in my case, for example, they can report it to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has a complaint section, and they're a government agency, probably, I'm guessing, about 3 years old. And if you submit a complaint to them that you've already submitted all the documentation, they will then contact the company, and usually it gets resolved. They can also go to the Better Business Bureau and do the same thing, and they can also try the Attorney General's office. So generally, if I have a client in that situation, I have them hit up all three at the same time and then see what comes back.
Now, this sounds like something. This is something that most people are able to do themselves, but you coach people through the process.
Yeah, right. Pretty much, I coach people through the process. I don't give any legal advice. What I do is I teach them how credit works. I've written an e-book on credit, you know, something simple that helps them understand the process, because my goal is that teach a man to fish goal. If I do it for you, you're going to fail and not learn anything. But if I teach you how it works and I can help you, guide you, and give you the options, then you will not, hopefully, ever want to be in the situation again. But should you fall into the situation, you know how to resolve it. And then going back to your question is, yes, under the FCRA, there are legal remedies, and of course they'd have to go to an attorney that specializes in Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is a federal law, to move forward and, you know, sue.
Now, when you are talking about disputes that have failed to roll off, earlier you said something about you might be able to go to the creditor itself and try and negotiate with them. So tell me about that step in the process. So that your client has contacted the CRA. The CRA says your creditor reports back that it's actually your debt or this is correct information. You then have recourse to the creditor, right? How does that work?
Well, right. Well, typically when I work with a client, they'll send out one letter to the credit reporting agencies, but they'll also send out letters to the creditors and the collection agencies requesting validation of debt. And let me just define. Verification of debt is basically if I say, Mike, how much was your bill, your bill, and you give me the total. Whereas validation of debt is, Mike, I want an itemized breakdown, a statement from you. If it's a credit card, I might want a copy of something with a signature on it. I want some actual proof that this is my debt. And I want to know, how did that debt add up to what it is today? Was there interest rates, and did it exceed the laws for that state for the amount that was charged? I want to see if it's my debt, what are you actually charging me for in a breakdown? Now,
So there's a difference between verification and validation, which are two words I see thrown around a lot about credit reports.
Right. Well, verification is just he said, she said. You know, you call a company and they say, or you write a letter to a company and they say, you owe us $1,000. Whereas
Right.
validation is, I want some type of a proof. I maybe copies of statements, something with a signature preferably, if it's something that required a signature initially. I want to see a breakdown by date of how you're charging me, and then I want to know what interest rate you've been charging me, any fees, any penalties, or if it's a debt collection, where there are lawyers' fees. How did you come to that amount? And also, is that corresponding to what's on the credit report, which oftentimes it's not even the same number. So those are things you have to look for, because before you pay anything, don't you want to know what it's for and how they came to that conclusion, or do you just believe what every company tells you?
Absolutely. So how do I get that validation that so many of us so badly want? How do I make them validate the debt?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Now, if you get a letter from a company, a creditor or collection agency, you have 30 days, it'll tell you, you have 30 days in which to request it and dispute it and get that information from them. The problem comes when it's beyond the 30 days. Now, you can still send out a letter and request that information, but a lot of times they won't respond. If they don't, then you can utilize the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and file a complaint. And I found in most cases, those companies typically do respond back with the information.
Because the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau has a little bit of clout, right?
Exactly. And if they have the clout, then it'll get you back the information. A lot of times people think the Federal Trade Commission, which in the case of the credit bureaus, the credit reporting agencies, monitors them, they think that the FTC will help them. But the FTC does nothing more than tally complaints. They don't actually do anything unless you have like 1,000 complaints against a company in 1 week. They might look at it, but other than that, they don't do anything.
Okay, so the CFPB, by the way, that's at consumerfinance.gov, right? That's their website?
Yeah, or if you just Google Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, it'll come right up.
It'll come right up. Actually, I've been to their site because they also deal with mortgage loan servicing, and there's some new regulations just came out in January. So their site is actually very, I think, easy to understand and very useful, and gives you a lot of information, and also tells you how to make a complaint. It does it so in a way that I think is very clear. For something the government has done, I think it's actually remarkably well put together. So
right. And for what it is that it actually is easy. It's user friendly. It's fairly simple to understand, and you typically get a response back within 2 to 3 weeks, which I find amazing.
That is fantastic. So what's the next step? You've asked for your creditor to confirm the validity of this debt. They respond yay or nay. How often does that stage actually work for what you see?
I mean, as far as getting the validation of debt, if you push it, I'm going to say 80 to 90% of the time, you will get back the information that you requested. But my mantra is whoever gives up first loses. So the persistence is really what pays. Yeah, that's what pays off. You can't drop it.
Once you've got that information, because you've been persistent, once you've got that information, how do you use it? What do you do with it?
Okay, if they get back the information, and let's just say hypothetically that all the information has been validated and it's correct, now that's where in the state of Florida you have a 5-year statute of limitations on the debt from the date of initial delinquency when you first defaulted, unless you made a subsequent payment which resets the clock. So now for clients, if it's within the 5-year statute of limitations for debt collection, which means legally they can be sued, then it's in the interest of the client to try and resolve that debt, typically by making a payment, sometimes the full amount, sometimes less, and a lot of times they will attempt to do that in writing first. They can call the company and try and do it over the phone. Of course, you're going to be recorded, so you have to be cautious with what you say. But the goal behind it, whether it's done in writing or by letter, is to get a positive outcome. So you might be able to negotiate that debt off your report for less money. The older the debt is, because remember, you can report under the Fair Credit Reporting Act for 7.5 years, a different date. So if you can negotiate what's called a pay-for-delete agreement, meaning that the creditor or collection agency agrees to remove it from your report, which, by the way, must be in writing, then you might have a good deal right there. Because
now, let me interrupt you. Just when you said earlier, if it's within the statute of limitations, there's so much information with what you just said. It's hard to pinpoint one thing. But you said a moment ago, if it's within the statute of limitations, if it's within that 5-year window, then sometimes it makes sense to make a payment. But that restarts the statute of limitations, doesn't it? Unless you're making a payment to kill it dead.
Well, right. If it's within the 5-year statute of limitations, but you're talking about the negotiation part of it.
Right. Exactly. When you make a payment on a debt, that restarts the clock. So if you're 4 years in and you make a payment,
you just reset it.
They get a hold of the clock. You reset it to the beginning. So that is a judgment call in a lot of cases. Unless you're making a payment that closes out the debt. Like I'm going to pay.
Right.
I'm going to pay you $500. You claim I owe $1,000. I'm going to pay you half that, and we're going to call it a day. Right.
Right. If you're trying to, in the case of my clients, they're trying to get it off their reports. So if they can, whether they negotiate it out for the full amount or a lesser amount, if they get something in writing from the company stating that company will agree to delete it off their reports, and it's in writing, then that person can take that and go to the mortgage person, in my case, and they have a special program that'll upload it to the credit bureaus and remove it faster than waiting for the creditor or collection agency to do it. But the goal is to get it off your report.
Your goal is to clean up the reports, so that your clients have a window of opportunity to get a new loan, say, whether it's a car loan or a home loan or whatever, so that clean up all their prior negative credit history by reaching some kind of agreement with the creditors, with the collection agencies, to say, if I pay you something now or get on a payment plan, then you're going to take that negative information off the report because we've reached an agreement, and that's okay.
Right. It is, and typically I don't think payment plans are good because they can continue reporting until the end, which further damages your credit. So typically the creditor or collection agency wants a lump sum settlement. But again, the key thing is it's got to be in writing because verbal doesn't count. And here's what happens, and most people don't understand this because I get a lot of calls on this. Someone will call me and say, I just paid off all of my collections. And my response is, and I feel bad when I say this, is you basically shot yourself in the foot because you didn't, like 99% of people or more don't know. When you just mail in a check to pay it off, as a consumer, you think, hey, the debt zeroes out, so my scores are going to go up. FICO designed a system to hurt you. Remember I said at the beginning when we started.
That's right.
When you pay that amount, it brings the old debt date current to today when you paid it off, and it drops your scores like a bomb. So if you pay off, I can't tell you don't pay your collections, but here's the key. Most people don't realize that you can negotiate with most of these companies, depending upon how persistent you are, to get something in writing to get it off your report. And that's the goal. Because why pay it and have further damage your scores? But you have to know, as a consumer, that it's negotiable, and it's called a pay-for-delete agreement.
So what I'm hearing from you, well, first of all, you also talked about that just because something is beyond the statute of limitations, there's still that window of time at which it can be reported. The debt may be more than 5 years delinquent, but it's a 7+ year window for them to have what's called derogatory credit reporting, correct?
Correct. That same initial delinquency date stands for the 7-year, 180 days that they can actually report it on your report. Now, it falls in Florida, between the 5-year statute of limitations on debt collection and the 7.5-year statute of limitations on credit reporting. That can actually be a good thing because the company cannot legally collect. But you as a consumer might not know that, and it's too old for them to collect, and you just paid it, and you just killed your scores.
So when you say they can't collect, they can't sue you for it, but they can still call you up and ask you for it.
Right. They can call, and they can still send you letters, but they can't sue you for it. Now, under the Florida Consumer Collection Practices Act and the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, there are certain situations where, say, a debt collector violates certain laws. So, for example, if they're threatening you. They're, going to come beat you up. They're threatening to sue you. They're going to call you a liar.
They threaten to sue you when they can't, right? When that's a violation of the act.
Right, and I know that there are it's $1,000 statutory violation, in which case, they can go to an attorney like yourself, and you can then sue that company for that, get it stripped off of the report most of the time, and the client wins.
So instead of you paying them, they actually end up paying you, and depending on how much leverage you have. Well, now that's interesting, because one of the things you're talking about is that if it's within the statute, they can still sue you, so they actually have some more power. So you might end up settling your debt for maybe more money than you would if it's beyond the time when they can sue you, because they can't make you pay. All they can do is maybe persuade you or trick you into paying, right?
Yeah,
so if something's beyond the statute, if something's beyond the statute of limitations, you could settle it for pennies on the dollar, possibly, right?
Right, you can. Again, key thing is must be in writing.
Must be.
And
in
the
writing.
other thing too,
absolutely.
on the pay for delete, let's hypothetically say it's $1,000 debt, and the consumer settles it out with the collection agency for $500. They have to. I know the language states in the letters typically it's for full satisfaction and accord of the debt, which in English means if I pay $500 on a $1,000 debt and you're deleting it, you're also not selling off the remaining $500 to another collection agency and putting it back on my report, which further damages me.
Paid in full, basically, is what that means, right?
Right,
full
but deleted off the report. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And the deletion from the report has to be in writing too, right?
Everything has to be in writing. As far as I'm concerned, everything must be in writing. Not in writing doesn't count.
So what I'm hearing you describe is that disputing information in your credit report is one way to go about it. That can work sometimes for inaccurate information. And inaccurate information, if it lingers there, you do have some rights as to that. But one extremely effective tool for dealing with accurately reported bad debt is simply pay them to go away. Maybe not the full amount they're claiming, but some kind of reduced settlement amount. Say, you're coming at me for $1,000. I'm going to give you $500, and full accord and satisfaction, and pay for delete. Sign it on the dotted line. Everything's in writing, and then that clears up that credit line from your report.
Right, that's correct. However, I will tell you, dealing with debt collection agencies is much easier in doing a pay for delete or agreement. When you're dealing with an original creditor, with a lender, with a bank, they're going to tell you they fall under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and they're held to a higher standard, so to speak. But I will also tell you, on the other side of the coin, I've had plenty of clients who were able to negotiate with the creditor, the original lender, or the bank to get a better marking on the report or to have it deleted. And again, you must be persistent, because if you give up, you lose.
I've heard the same thing because I deal with banks directly most often, and I've had banks refuse to delete credit lines because they say, well, we're obligated to report accurate information. We can't lie to the credit reporting agencies. And my response to that has always been, we're not asking you to lie. We're asking you to just delete the trade line, to remain silent, saying nothing. Now, they're able to do that if they choose to, right? Like they can say nothing. There's nothing requiring them to report debt of any kind.
Well, I'll give you my biggest secret, Mike. There's something called a universal data form. A universal data form allows any of these companies, creditors or collection agencies, to check a box and delete it off your report. They don't want to. You have to make them want to. They
don't want to because it's in their financial interest to have you with more negative information so they can charge you higher rates.
You got it. That's exactly the purpose.
So they can actually exaggerate your lack of creditworthiness so that they can charge you a higher fee than they might otherwise be able to, because if there's additional negative information in your report, you're a worse credit risk on paper than you are in real life, and so the price to them is higher. They can charge you a higher fee. Okay.
Well, keep in mind, we talked 70% of people have credit stuff on their credit they don't even know about. So that means 70% or 7 out of 10 people have credit scores lower than they should.
Okay. Now, getting this universal data form checked off with the delete the credit line, how do you make them want to do that for you?
Well, in the case of the clients that I have, because they've learned about it and they know about it, they can use that in either written or verbal negotiations, because now they're in that tiny percentage of people that actually knows what's going on. And they've differentiated themselves by being highly knowledgeable as opposed to the majority of consumers who have no clue.
So when a creditor hears you say universal data form, they've just told you we can't lie to the credit reporting agencies. We can't tell a falsehood. And you say, but all I want you to do is check off the delete on the UDF. Suddenly that's like speaking in code to them. I know what I'm talking about, and I know you just lied to me. Is that exactly what you're saying?
That's exactly correct. And keep in mind, they pay the credit bureaus. No one makes them pay the credit bureaus to subscribe to them.
Right.
So that they don't want you to know. Why do they want you to know? It's not in their financial interest to let you know.
Well, it sounds like that secret that you've just given is worth thousands, if not millions of dollars to people who might be listening today. I mean, that's because getting the mortgage loan you need because you've been able to negotiate that UDF negative checkoff, and could literally save somebody hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of a home loan.
Exactly right. And again, after a client,
I should be paying you today.
Right. Well, remember, for the client, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of learning. And once they get through it, they don't want to do it again. So guess what happens? They monitor their credit. They take care of business. They don't make any late pays. And, God forbid they end up, say, in a medical situation, they know now what to do beforehand.
Interesting. You want to share a little bit about that?
What, about how they know what to do? Well, because I can give you a case.
If you're anticipating, some financial hardship, a medical circumstance coming up, or a temporary job loss, you can prepare for that in terms of looking ahead at your credit.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, you have a medical situation, whether you're insured or not, there's no reason why you can't get something in writing from the medical provider, some type of a written agreement stating, I'll make a payment plan with you. But part of that will be you will not, as long as I stick to it, you will not report me to the credit bureaus. You will not sell it off to a collection agency. So if something bad happens, you do everything in writing and you make an agreement beforehand.
Got it. And most creditors will appreciate you coming forward beforehand, letting them know and working with them and not just leaving them in the lurch, right?
Correct. I mean, it's funny. One of the things I get from clients or prospects who call me up is they'll say things like, well, I was in my 20s and I made a big mess and I went crazy on credit cards and I just kind of threw everything away. And now I'm ready to step up. Well, you know what? It would be great if people would learn about credit before they have to use it. But unfortunately, it's not taught in schools.
Okay.
So I pretty much get people on the reverse end who have already been in trouble. But if I can help people before that happens, then you wouldn't need me, which wouldn't be a bad thing, because you have a lot of knowledge about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is stuff that should be taught in schools. I know that, right now, teenagers or college students are like the number one target for credit card companies. They're giving credit cards out like candy to kids with no incomes because they're in college and have this future income prospect, or at least they used to, and they were seen as creditworthy because of their future earning potential. And so get them when they're young and foolish and haven't learned all this stuff the hard way yet before they're in the real world. And then once they actually get jobs, then they're on the hook and you can collect the money out of them at like 18% because that's what the rate would be if they've missed it. Right. Too bad financial literacy is not a requirement to get one of these cards.
No, it would be nice. I've gone to schools locally here, and really no interest, but I do give a lot of speeches, real estate brokerages, mortgage companies, and chambers of commerce, things like that. And people always ask me, why don't I teach it? Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much of an interest in anything in this country until it's an after-the-fact negative, as opposed to preventative and learning about it so you understand. But listen,
there's a lot of people close the barn door after the horse is gone, right?
Right. I mean, most people don't know how to balance their checkbook. Most people don't even read their credit card statements, Mike. And I read mine religiously every month. And I can tell you, I find things that I've never purchased. And now, years ago, I had my purse stolen. And yes, I filed an ID theft affidavit, which will last on my report for 7 years. So maybe someone has my information. I don't know. But my credit card company changed my card number 3 times in the last year as a result of things I found that were not my purchases.
Well, and that's especially problematic now with the internet, because we can't go a month without reading about a new breach of data security where either some online realtor or a retailer or even a brick and mortar retailer like I think Target lost millions of credit cards.
Target, Neiman Marcus is another one. These big companies, as encrypted as they may think they are with their information, the bad guys always find a way to breach it. And that's why it's important that you know what's on your reports.
So you may be a perfectly squeaky clean, pay your bills on time every day kind of person, and somebody else has stolen your information and used that to get credit in your name and that you didn't know about, and maybe sullying your good reputation, right?
Exactly, and people don't realize there are lots of ways. I've heard insane ways of how information is stolen, and nowadays there are all kinds of electronic devices. They can walk past you and they can scan what's in your phone, and people keep information in their phone. That it's where you keep your information. I don't keep any.
If I lost my cell phone, I would be dead. That would be
and right. I mean, for anything that requires the use of a username and password on my computer, I actually keep it written on a piece of paper, which I won't tell you where I hide it, but that way I know where it is. I don't keep it on my computer because if somebody hacks into my computer, they now have access. And it's sad because I'm a credit consultant. I don't really deal with the money end of it. But just a side note, I've had people say to me they're victims of identity theft or something has happened with their bank accounts. You know what? You've got to go to your bank if you've had an issue and change your bank account numbers, not the password. Change your bank account numbers. Get new bank accounts.
Close the old and open a new one, right? I mean, I think
exactly.
We did do that once.
But the banks don't tell you that. The banks will say just change your passcode. Change your bank account number.
Wow. Well, this has been an incredibly information-packed call today. And really, I've learned a lot. I learned a lot of stuff that I thought was wrong, and you set me on the path. I mean, we've known each other for almost 7 years, and I still didn't know half the things we talked about today. So this has really been great.
Thanks. I'll just give you. I'll just tell you real quick. The way I look at credit, this is my analogy. Remember the old Rubik's Cubes, which had a different color on each side?
I know them well, actually, yeah.
Yeah, most people come to me with a Rubik's Cube in a mess. And my goal is to teach them to put it back as close as possible. It's probably not going to get perfect, but as close as possible to where you have the solid colored sides. That's my analogy of credit. It's a puzzle.
It's a puzzle. You need to be persistent, and you need to know the right moves to make, right?
Right, and everybody's different.
Okay. Well, before we close, let me ask you, first of all, what is kind of the person who is ideally suited for you to be able to help them?
Well, first off, anyone who knows they have issues, if they think they're a victim of a merge file or identity theft, and that's a whole other subject for another day. But
somebody who knows they've got inaccurate information on the report is number one.
Right, and you have to check your reports to know if you have inaccurate information on your reports. Can you
walk people through that process of checking their own reports? Is that something you're able to
that's part of the service. I do 2 steps. The first step that I do is, I will check their report, I analyze it, I put it onto a spreadsheet because I'm making my own notes, and then I do a telephone consultation and we go over it. I'm telling them what the report says about them, and then I ask them information relative to each specific credit line. That's the first step. And then I explain everything, what it means in English to them. Second step, if they proceed, is where I work with them typically on a 90-day time frame, and it's based upon how much work. So I post all of the information on my site regarding fees and so forth. It's not just about helping them with the negative, Mike, but also subsequently you have to have enough positive credit. And if you don't, then, that can also hurt you in the FICO scoring model. So I do everything in a very logical order. It's both logical, but at the same time, it's creative in that you have to kind of know how to work the circle.
So it's not enough just to quit smoking. You also have to go out and exercise too. I mean, not just negative habits, but develop some positive.
Exactly. Right. You got to have good habits.
So anybody who's had negative information, but also maybe anybody who is looking at anybody who's uncertain about whether or not their credit score health is adequate, come get a checkup, right?
Right. If you're going, like I said, if you're going to apply for, people come to me and they say, I'm applying for a big job and, I'm in trouble, with my credit. Or people come to me and say, hey, I'm paying these incredibly high interest rates and I'm working 2 or 3 jobs to try to pay down my credit cards. Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you need a credit checkup.
Got it. And then anybody who is anticipating a life change, getting a major loan, job change, anything like that, and their credit score might impact that. Also somebody who should talk to you, right?
Exactly. And I actually practice what I preach. I have very high credit scores. I understand. I'm going to say, does anyone understand 100%? No. I probably understand 95% of how it works. But I do like challenges, Mike. I like when people come to me with something I don't know, because then it forces me to look into it and figure out, how do I solve that problem? How do I help them solve it?
Well, knowing 95% of the information is probably your leaps and bounds ahead of most of us. I mean, you like you said, you know more about it than I do, and most of what I thought I knew was wrong. So your 95% is probably, comparatively speaking, as close to 100% as most people need. So how does somebody find you if they need you?
They can actually call me, 813-500-6064. I have a website which is called Credit Education Consultants with an S at the end, .com, and I have lots of information on that site. I also provide a lot of tips for free on my Credit Education Consultants Facebook page. There's a lot of information on that as well.
Oh, that's super. Is there a link to your Facebook page from your main website?
You know what? I believe there is.
Good. So you're easy to find. You're very easy to find. Lots of free information on your website, on your Facebook page. Lots of information you've given out today. And just you're showing us that not only do you know your stuff, but you know how to help other people get there. And so if you find yourself with credit scores in 300s or 400s and you need to get it up to the 800s, you can actually figure out a way. It may not be easy, but there's a way to do it, right?
Right. My entire goal is, like I said, is to help people, to teach people so they can manage it for themselves. That's my goal.
Great. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for being with us today. Give us your phone number one more time and your website one more time.
Sure. It's 813-500-6064, and the website is Credit Education Consultants with an S at the end, .com.
Okay, great. And I am Michael Wasylik, Florida foreclosure defense lawyer at Ricardo Wasylik. You can reach me at ricardolaw.com. That's RICARDOLAW.com. Or you can call me 352-567-3173. Thank you so much, Laurie, for being with us today, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike, for having me. It was a pleasure.